All right, guys, welcome to the last section of Chapter 8, A. We're calling it, kind of doing a half of a chapter at a time here. But I wanted to talk to you today about the subject of midpoint, which is kind of related to distance in that it is coordinate geometry. We're using the XY coordinate grid in order to do these problems, but I just wanted to kind of touch base with you on this. Again, this is the practice that you're going to be doing today. So I wanted to just take a look at a few problems. And we're going to start kind of like we did yesterday. We're going to start graphically with the first graphic example, and then we'll see how we use that to kind of figure out everything else, okay? So first, let's identify our 2 points that we have. We've got a point up here at the top. That would be -1, +5. So I'm going to go ahead and put that up here. Okay. And then we also have this point right here, which would be -3, +1. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to write that actually over here, just so maybe you can see it a little bit better. So you kind of get an idea of what we've got here. We've got these 2 points, and we're asked to find the midpoint. Well, I want you to just think for just a second about midpoint and about what that could be. Well, we could say, well, it's basically about right there, but we need to know exactly where it is, right? And to make sure of exactly where it is. Well, the problem is it's not, again, straight up and down. Sort of a similar situation we had with distance. We can't just count up, right? But we can kind of use that methodology because the middle would mean that it would have to be exactly the same this way and exactly the same that way, right? So I want you to think about if I had 2 people and they had one had a score of a 92 on a test and the other had a score of an 88 on a test. Okay, so if I add those 2 together, I'm going to get 180, correct? Well, if I want to know the average between these 2 people, then all I have to do is just take this that I've added together, right, and then just divide that by 2, and now I know that the average score is a 90. Well, the same exact kind of process is what you use in order to find the midpoint. And so if we're looking for the midpoint of this particular problem of these particular 2 points, then that's really similar to what we have to do. So I'm going to write us out a little formula here. We're going to use it actually a lot today to help us with various types of problems. So midpoint, guys, I apologize for how I'm writing this thing. It's kind of new to me, so it's taking me a little bit to get used to it. But really with midpoint, we know that it's going to be an XY coordinate, correct? It's going to be somewhere on this coordinate grid. And so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of make like a coordinate. And I know that this would always be my X and this would always be my Y, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I want to do something very similar to that I did yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and label this as X1 and this one is Y1. And I'm going to label this one as X2 and Y2. And again, it doesn't matter if you call this X1 and Y1 and this one X2 and Y2. It doesn't really make any difference because what we're going to do with these 2 points, you're going to see is it doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to do is very similar to what I did over here to find the average, right? If I'm trying to find the middle point between these 2 points, then I add them together and I divide by 2. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing here. I'm going to take my X coordinates, X1 plus X2, and I'm going to divide that by 2. I'm trying to find the average between those 2 X coordinates. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing with my Y coordinates. So Y1 plus Y2 divided by 2 because I want to find essentially the average, okay? So my midpoint, I'm just going to abbreviate MP, equals X1 plus X2. Well, let's take a look at that. I've got -3 plus a -1. So -3 plus a -1 is -4, and that's going to be divided by 2, okay? My Y coordinates, I've got 1 plus 5, which equals 6, and that is also going to be divided by 2. So final answer for the midpoint between these 2 points is -4 divided by 2, which is -2, and 6 divided by 2, which is 3. And if you look at it, you can kind of see that already anyway. At -2, +3 would be right here. And that is, in fact, the midpoint of this particular line that I'm talking about. Okay, so I want you to remember this formula right here because, again, it's very, very basic. It's not really hard. But again, you're going to be given things that are just coordinate points. All right, so let's move over to number 1, and let's take a look at that. So again, the first thing I would do with this is I would go ahead and label my points. So I've got x1, y1, x2, y2. Okay. Remember my midpoint, and again, I'm just going to abbreviate MP equals x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And then I'm going to have y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Okay. So let's go ahead and do some math here. X1 plus x2. I've got -1 plus 0. -1 plus 0 is going to be -1. And again, that is always divided by 2 because we're trying to find the average. And then I've got y1 is -7 plus a -5. So -7 plus a -5 is -12 divided by 2. And so final answer on this one, I can just leave that as -1/2. And here I'm going to have -12 divided by 2, which is -6. Okay. So that means that my midpoint between these 2 points would be -1/2, comma, -6. Okay. So now let's go to the last part, which is probably the most difficult part for students to really get. But I think once we show you an example of this, you're really going to be able to understand what's going on. Okay. So let's go down to near the bottom, and let's look at number 9 here. So number 9, and let me see if I can zoom back out here, and we'll zoom right back in. It says, find the other endpoint of the line segment with the given endpoint and midpoint. So this time, they're not giving you 2 endpoints. They're giving you an endpoint and a midpoint, and you have to find the other endpoint. Okay. So again, I think it helps me to maybe look at this graphically first and then kind of go from there. So I'm going to zoom back in just a little bit so we can just look at our problem at hand. Again, this is our endpoint that we're given, and this is our midpoint that we're given. So what I like to do is go ahead and kind of look at this graphically, and then we'll look at it in the light that it's asking us. So I'm going to go ahead and sketch a little coordinate grid right here. And again, I emphasize the word sketch. Okay, that's all this is. So I'm going over to -10 and +2. So here is my point here. My end point is -10, +2. Okay. Now let's look at the midpoint that it's given me is +8. So we'll say that's there. -3 is over here. Okay, so what I want you to think about is this is the end point, and it's going through this midpoint, which means, and this is going to be a terrible line probably, but that means that my other endpoint is somewhere down in here. Now, there's a couple of things that we can really realize when we start to look at stuff like this, is if this was a multiple choice test, for example, I know that this is quadrant 1, this is quadrant 2, this is quadrant 3, and this is quadrant 4, right? And I know that values over in this area are going to have a positive y, but they're going to have a positive x, I'm sorry, and a negative y, okay? So on a multiple choice test, you may be able to just to realize, hey, this point is over in here somewhere, and maybe you only have one answer choice that has a positive negative, okay? So then you can really quickly figure out what that may be, okay? In this case, this is not multiple choice, which is intentional because I want you to know how to do it before you actually see it on a multiple choice test. But we do know that it's over in here somewhere, but how in the world do we find that? Okay, let's go back to our formula, and I want us to start plugging in what we actually know. Okay, so again, let's look at this. We have our midpoint we know equals x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and we have y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So that is our formula that we've been using this whole time to try to help figure these out. So then I want to think about, okay, well, here's my coordinates that I'm working with. So let me see what I could do here. So let's go ahead and label these points. This one I'm going to go ahead and say is X1, Y1, but this one is actually my midpoint. Okay. So let's think about where those things go in to the formula at. Well, my midpoint right here is 8, -3. So I'm going to go ahead and put that here, 8, -3. Okay, that is my midpoint. I already know that. The only thing I know over here is I know my X1 and my Y1. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and fill those things in because now I have -10 plus some kind of X value. I don't know what that is yet, divided by 2. Okay, and I also have a Y value right here of +2 plus some other unknown Y value that I don't know. And again, I know I'm going to be dividing that by 2. So let's just think about equations for just a second. And again, this maybe looks like something, oh no, Mr. Hamilton, we've got into a mess. Well, the fact is, if you notice, I'm dividing this one by 2 and I'm dividing this one by 2, right? So what really bothers me about this type of problem is I'm dividing by this 2. I do not like fractions. A lot of people don't like fractions at all. But fractions are really bothering me in this problem. It's making it almost impossible to be able to do. Okay, so what I want you to think about is that there's no rule that says that I can't go ahead and multiply this whole part by 2, and that is going to get rid of those fractions. Okay, but the other part of that equation is that I must also multiply this whole part by 2. Okay, so I'm going to give myself a little more real estate here. We're going to go over as far as we can over this direction. And so this is the problem that I'm really working with now. And again, hopefully this is not getting confusing, but all we did is we just plugged in the values that we know, and now we're trying to solve this thing. Okay. So because I multiplied by 2, all of this is going to go away. And I'm actually going to multiply this entire point by this 2. Okay. So here's what I'm going to end up with. I'm just going to move my work over this way. So I'm going to end up with 2 times 8, which is going to be 16. I'm going to have 2 times -3, which is going to be -6. So that's the new thing I'm shooting for, okay? Notice what happens here. Now I have -10 plus x, and I have 2 plus y. That's the only thing I have left over here, okay? So now let's just kind of think about what really is going to happen here. I've got to take -10 and I've got to add something to it that's going to make 16. Okay. So if you want to, you can kind of think about that as its own little equation because this is my X coordinate. This is my Y coordinate, right? I've got to try to figure out what I can do here to make this work out. So actually, I'm going to add me another page. Hopefully this will work out. Okay, so I added me another page, and here's what I want you to see we can do. We could take our X coordinate, which is 16, and I'm going to set that equal to what needs to happen over here with this X coordinate, which is -10 plus X. Okay, so again, we can solve this just like a normal equation. I'm going to have to add 10 to both sides. When I add 10 to both sides, I'm going to get an X coordinate of 26. Okay. So let's do the same thing for the Y coordinate. We've got -6 is our Y coordinate right here, and it has to equal somehow, some way, 2 plus Y, okay? So in order to finish this out, I'm going to have to subtract 2 from both sides, which means that I'm going to end up with -8 equals Y. So my other endpoint that I really have, my answer really is 26 -8. Okay, that is the other endpoint that I need. Now I know that looks like a lot of work, but actually once you kind of get going with this, I don't think you're going to have near the issue. So let's just make sure that makes sense. Okay, I've always tried to tell you to use logic to help you to figure out whether things really make sense or not. Okay, so I want you to think about this being our answer, 26 -8, right? And let's think about this. This point here, remember, was Get back up there real quick. 8, -3. Okay, this point right here was 8, -3. And so think about it. You're moving a pretty great distance, right? From -10 all the way to 8 is a pretty good distance. Okay, so if you think about this point right here, which we kind of just made a guess as this is where it would be, all right, that makes sense that you're going over even further and you're going down a little further, which is exactly what this point right here would be. Okay. So again, hopefully this kind of made sense. Obviously, if you need help, especially with this last part, make sure that you get in touch with us so that we can kind of look through that again. But the main thing is to remember is just to use that formula, okay, right here to kind of help you to set those up. And matter of fact, you could use those for every one of these, okay? So hopefully, again, this has been helpful to you. Again, this is using midpoint and using coordinate geometry. So if you need help, make sure to get in touch with us and we'll do our best to try to get back with you. Thanks.